You know, it's funny, years and years ago, I was asked to move to another city and work in a health club for the same company I worked for in Gainesville. And I remember at that point I was the top salesman in the entire company. But I never talked about that, because when I go into this other club, the regional manager is there. His name was Pete Mindersma, and all the staff was sitting there, and I did not want to be in Merritt Island. I loved Gainesville. But I remember he introduced me, and I remember he said, I want to introduce Joe Cirulli. He's the top salesperson in the entire company. And I remember my brain went blank, because all I kept saying to myself was, don't tell him that. I said, because I don't even want to be here. Now, I do want to be here, all right? But Sarah, when you gave me an introduction a while ago, I'm thinking, oh, don't tell him that. You know, I'll be you know, explaining things to you that I've learned over the years. But a number of years ago, another friend of mine, he asked me, he said, Joe, would you speak to my company? And I said, how many people would it be? He goes, 1,000. And I said, what do you want me to talk about? And he goes, oh, you know, the vision thing. So when Erin asked me to speak, I said, Erin, what did you want me to speak about? She goes, leadership. You know, kind of a pretty broad subject, and I know I'm not a professor, so I realized most of what I learned about leadership I really learned a long time ago, and a lot of it was crammed into a relatively short period of time. But as I was thinking about what I would want to talk about, I remember a great book I read a long time ago by an author named Robert Fulghum. And he wrote a book that some of you may have read. It said, all I really need to know, I learned in kindergarten. And so I should be able to kind of talk about certain years of my life that were like kindergarten for me. They're actually from the age of 19 to 24 and a half. And the reason why that was such an important part of my learning, when we talk about leadership, I think the first thing we have to do is learn how to lead ourselves before we can lead anybody else. But from the ages of 19 to 24, I worked for 6 companies, 6 companies that went bankrupt. I lived in closed down health clubs. I lived in health clubs I worked in. I lived in my car. But it never pulled me down. Whenever I got a job in the next health club, I just gave it everything that I had. I gave it 100%. And unfortunately, I couldn't really do anything for the part that the owners had. But on my part, I know that I always gave it everything that I had. And I learned that it doesn't matter in an organization who gets the benefit. And it doesn't matter if it's not the role or the position that you plan on having for the rest of your life. The one thing that I've learned is and I tell all my new employees this too, I said, I don't expect you to be a receptionist or a secretary or an instructor on the exercise floor or in housekeeping. I don't expect you to do this for the rest of your life. I said, but what I do expect you to do is to give it everything you have, because I guarantee you, if you do that all the time, when you find that opportunity, when you find that thing you really want, you don't have to all of a sudden figure out, how do I give it everything I got? What does it mean to give it everything I got? Because you've practiced your whole life, for it. And I can remember one day after I'd been in business for about 8 years, and I had built my club went from a little club to about a 32,000 square foot facility. There was this girl, her name was Marie Speed, and Marie was a receptionist at the Steve Spurrier Health Spa, which is where I first began. And she knew all the stuff that I went through, but I hadn't seen her for years. And I can remember she was walking through the club, she says to me, she goes, Joe, can you believe this is all yours? And I said, Marie, every single one of them was all mine. I never had to practice. I had always been doing it. I didn't have to learn how to do it at that point. So what I realized that wherever you are in your business life, no matter what your role is, give it everything you have and do it the best you can possibly do it. The important thing is you take ownership of everything you do. The second thing is I learned is before I could, quote, ever inspire anybody else, I had to inspire myself. And actually I learned by default how to do that. When I say that, when I was 20 years old, I remember I was sitting in an office and I opened up a drawer and there was this book in there. It was called The Power of Positive Thinking by Dr. Vincent Peale. And I remember, I've heard about these positive thinking books. I never read one, but I heard about them and I started reading it. And it started talking about all these things that people accomplished by the way they thought and by setting up goals. And as I'm reading it through, I'm thinking, holy cow, I never thought about these things before. Now, I'm from a small town in upstate New York. I have 7 brothers and sisters. My mother was a nurse. My father was in the military. And it was we had a good family. It was a middle-class family. But my thinking was what I had always seen. You know, it was middle class. That's what I always saw. I never thought of anything more. I never thought anything less. I just thought this is the way life was. And the book helped me understand what I was capable of, how much more things I could do in my life simply by the way I thought and set goals. I remember this company I worked for, because it was Steve Spurrier was taken over by another company. They had about 100 salespeople, and I was brand new. And after reading the book, I said, well, I'm going to set a goal. I'm going to set a goal to be the top salesperson in the entire company. 3 months later, I was the top salesperson. And the question, I even asked myself, how did I do that? Read the book, it said set a goal. I set the goal, and then it happened. And then I started thinking back about all the things I started doing to become better and better and better at what I did. The people I spoke with, the things I learned from them, and how I applied it. So as a leader, I think all of our goals has to be to become the absolute best that we can possibly be before you can inspire anybody else or ask somebody else to be the best that they can possibly be. You know, the third thing is during the time that I was living in my car, I went into a McDonald's, actually in Gainesville, and I ordered a small Diet Coke. The Coke was 16 cents. I reached in my pocket, all I had was 12. Slightly embarrassed, since I couldn't pay for the Diet Coke, I walked out the door. I can remember walking out the door, though I was embarrassed, and the situation I was in was kind of put together by a whole bunch of different people that I didn't have control over. I remember I walked outside, I looked up at the sky, and I remember thanking God for everything that happened to me. I actually thanked Him. I thanked Him for being completely broke. I could still tell you everybody's names from those companies that did what they did that helped me end up in the situation I was. I went through every one of their names, and I thanked them. Because I vowed at that moment, I said, I will never be broke again. Now, about a month later, I was 21 at the time, I got to manage my first health club in Gainesville. So understand, I had always read books on how to help me. After I learned that first book from Power of Positive Thinking, how helpful it was, I started reading other books that helped me. But when I was 21 and becoming first time becoming a manager of a health club, I decided that maybe I should go find another book. So I went to the bookstore, and I remember looking on the shelf, and I see this book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I thought, that's an interesting title. So I took the book off the shelf. I remember looking at the back side of it, and it said, this book is responsible for more people becoming millionaires than any book ever written. I thought, not that I ever thought about becoming a millionaire, but I thought, isn't that cool that you could actually say that about your book? So I got the book, and I remember I started reading it, and I couldn't stop reading it. And all the way through it kept saying, in order to be successful, you have to know the secret. Then you keep reading and say, in order to be successful, you have to know the secret. You keep reading. In order to be successful, you have to know the secret. I remember looking at the book and say, just tell me the damn secret. And by the time I finished, I realized what it was. And you just had to know what you wanted out of your life. That was it. So I was inspired, right? So I get a legal pad. I get a yellow legal pad. So I said, okay, if all you got to do is kind of write it down. Okay, number one, I will own my own health club in Gainesville, Florida, so nobody is going to tell me where I'm going to live, because I had to live in different cities. I said the second thing, I'll make the health club respected in the Gainesville community because they had a horrible reputation. Then I looked and said, you know, okay, you can just write down anything. Okay, I'll own a home in the mountains, a home in the ocean, I'll build my parents a home. Remember the fourth thing I wrote down was, by the time I'm 25, I will make $100,000. I remember I wrote down, I will own a little Mercedes like the $6 million man used to drive from when I was a little kid. And then I put down some other fun things like I'll become a black belt. Put down I'll become a pilot and own my own airplane. Remember, you could write down anything. I wrote down that I'll travel all over America. Wrote down I'll travel all over the world. And then the last thing I wrote was, well, I'll save $1 million, only because growing up, I heard everybody say, I wish I had $1 million, so I put it on the list. So the other thing I realized is that you had to read the list. So I read my list every single night and every single morning before I went to work. I later learned from a psychologist why that was so important was you read it before you go to bed because you don't have a whole bunch of stuff on your mind, and you read it before you go to work because you don't have a bunch of stuff on your mind. And he said you could drive it into your subconscious. Not that you're at work thinking about those things, but you work hard, okay, because you know you have reasons why you're doing what you're doing. So I'm reading it, 21, 22, 23, still reading it every night before I go to bed, every morning before I go to work. That's why I still know the list today. And I haven't read it in a long time, but I know the list. The fourth thing on my list, when I was, once again reading it when I was 23, was by the time I'm 25, I'll make $100,000. Well, I just want you to know I had never made over $12,000 at that point. So I remember putting a line through 100,000, I put 60,000. It didn't seem as far away. But understand, I never stopped reading books on how you're supposed to think. And remember when I was 24, I just got done reading a book called The Laws of Success. I go, I copped out. Everything says you're just supposed to believe it. So I put a line through 60,000, I put 100,000. Now once again, I still never made over $12,000 because all the clubs that went bankrupt. But when I was 24 and a half, and the 6th health club went bankrupt, that's when I started Gainesville Health Fitness Center. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but when I started the company, I only had $1,700 to start the company. Fortunately, none of the people I hired to build the whole place knew I only had $1,700. And I remember the one good thing about being Italian and being from New York was I remember what the rumor was. He's in the mafia. I used to hear that. I say, thank God they believe that. He goes, at least now they think I got the money. And somehow every week, I had the money. I brought in enough money to keep paying him half of what I owed him and come back the next week, I'd pay him the other half. And that's how I started the whole company. I mean, once again, fortunately, nobody knew. I mean, nobody even asked me how I was going to pay for him except one contractor. He goes, how are you going to pay for this? I didn't hire him. So now, here was the interesting thing. The day that I turned 26 years old, I had exactly $100,000 in my savings account. And I remember I looked at that and I go, whoa, it's not 99, it's not 101. It was the exact number I wrote down. And I said, I remember the feeling I had when that happened. I said, I can do anything. And 5 years later, I finished every single thing on that list. So my advice to you is write down all the things you want to accomplish in your life, and then read your list, and most importantly, believe in yourself. Like I said, the value of the list is it keeps you focused when you go to work on accomplishing something every day. Now, as I said, the first health club I worked for was a Steve Spurrier Health Spa. And when I was 20, it was taken over by another company out of Utah. And they brought in a new manager. I don't remember his last name, but I remember his first name was Peter. And remember, I'm 20 years old. He's been managing clubs out west, and he comes in and he introduced himself and he asked me to give him a tour of the facility. And I remember I walking him through the whole place. And as I'm giving him the tour, he's sharing with me things I could do to actually give a better tour. And I'm thinking, well, that's cool as heck. He's never even been here before, but he's helping me understand how to give a better tour of a place I've been in now for months. And it was just I just knew he was a good guy. Well, when I was done giving him the tour, he went in and he sat with the owners. And he was in there for about 2.5 hours. And he walks out of the office. He says, Joe, can I talk to you for a second? I said, sure. He goes, Joe, you're in sales, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, you were given certain sales goals, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, and you were given a bonus levels based upon your sales goals. I said, yes. He goes, did you accomplish that? And I said, yeah. He goes, did they lower the bonus after you accomplished it? And I remember I said, yeah, they did, but I can still do fine. And he goes, okay, I'll be back with you in just a little bit. And anyway, he walked out the door, and he came back in 5 minutes. He says, let me talk to you for a second. I said, okay. He goes, I just want you to know I resigned. And I said, why? He goes, Joe, I would never work for a company that promised something and then didn't deliver on their promise. I remember as he was walking out the door, all I thought to myself was, that's cool as hell. You know? And I remember that moment. I said, here's the deal with me. If I ever make a promise, before I make a promise, I'm going to think it through. But once I make the promise, even if I realize I made the wrong promise, I said, I will do it anyway. So that's the thing that I learned from him, is never lose your integrity over anything. Always keep your promises. Another thing, you know, you always hear you want to find your passion, and I know it's a cliche, but if you can really find something that you're passionate, I realize the most important thing is you start attracting other people who are passionate, you know, about it too. And you know, I've always believed I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world. I've always worked out. I've always believed in working out. And once I got down here and I started learning about business, I realized I love business too. And who could be in a better position than being in the business of something they love doing? And I mean, I could tell you all kinds of stories about that, but the great thing about it is I have employees that have been with me 25, 30, 35, over 40 years have been with me. Why? Because their passions, you know, their passion is the same as mine. Now, someone said, well, where did you get it from? And as I thought back over my life, one time I was asked to give a speech in Orlando. Well, I wasn't really asked to give the speech. Somebody else was supposed to give the speech. And it was at a big conference, and the people who were putting on the conference came up to me and said, Joe, and this was at 5:30 at night, the keynote speaker was coming on at 6. They go, the keynote isn't going to make it. They said, would you give a speech? I said, like about what? And they go, well, you know, how you got started in the industry. And I said, okay, but I got to leave here for the next half hour and I got to think, how did I get started in the industry? And I realized that I had to go back. You know how far I had to go back? To when I was 7 years old. And the reason why is, as I told you, my mother was a nurse, right? So she saw the worst of a lot of things. And from a little kid, all I ever heard from my mother, just remember, your health is the most important thing. Your health is the most important thing. And she drove that in my brain so much that I can remember turning on the TV and exercising to Jack LaLanne in front of my TV, right? I mean, for a lot of you don't know who Jack LaLanne is, but he used to be on TV a long time ago teaching how to exercise. You know, it's funny because I met Jack in 1985. I said, you know, Mr. LaLanne, I said, when I was 7 years old, I said, I used to stand in front of the TV. I said, I used to do these things all the time because I didn't want to get a double chin, and I was doing these and these because I didn't want that fat hanging off my arm. He goes, well, it worked. So, but the thing is, if you have a passion for what you do, you can build a team who also has that deep understanding of why you do what you do. And if you do that, I think you can build a team that's unstoppable. The next thing is, my first health club was 1,500 square feet. I mean, this room's probably about 3,000 or over 3,000, well over 3,000. My first health club was everything included, locker rooms, front desk, everything was 3,000 square feet. Today we're over 125,000 square feet. And we have 3 facilities, we've got 500 employees, we have 2 rehabilitation centers, and we have a boutique center in Clearwater, Florida, and Tampa that I'm testing out from a program that we have inside the club. And the thing that always keeps me going is, I read a quote a long time ago. It says, when you're green, you're growing. When you're ripe, you're rotting. And I never wanted to get to, quote, the rotting stage. But there's something else that I learned over the years, and that is that, you know, when you start with nothing, you have nothing to lose. But once you have something, you have something to lose. So what happens with a lot of people, because I've seen it over my whole career, is people who built this thing, now they got this thing, and now they're afraid to risk over here. And that scares the heck out of me. So whenever I get scared, whenever I think about that, I do it. Doesn't mean I don't think it through. I do think it through, but I do it. Because I never want to get to that point where I said, okay, I've had enough, because I haven't had enough yet. So the most important thing, I think, to be able to do that is to keep your energy high. So you need to take care of yourself physically, you need to take care of yourself emotionally, and you need to get plenty of sleep, too. You need to figure out how to get that in there. And the last thing I'll just cover is, if you do all the things right, eventually you'll get a lot of accolades and you'll get lots of awards. But the one thing I've learned, and I know, is that the accolades and awards are for what you did in the past. And nobody cares about really what you did in the past. I mean, maybe a veteran, yes. But for most of us know. And I remember I knew we were going to get named for something, and I remember my whole sales team was there, and I said, look, I just want you to know, next week we're going to be in Forbes magazine as one of the top 25 small businesses in America. I said, now you know what that means, right? And one of the girls has been with me for a long time. She goes, yes, it means we have to get better. And they understand that. They understand that we have to get better. And because what I've told them, I said, look, whenever you get these accolades, there's going to be people who read it, and they want to come here to prove it's not true, because they haven't figured out a way to do it, and they'll feel better if they find out you really can't either. I said, so we have to be better when they come in. That's why we have to keep working on it. So never stop figuring out how to become better.